Our focus now on the IPL fixing saga. The Supreme Court will resume hearing the Mudgal panel report today. In its last hearing, the Apex Court had expressed concern over Indian skipper Mahendra Singh Dhoni holding a position in Srinivasan's India Cements. On Thursday, the Supreme Court had cornered the heavyweight of Indian cricket. Questions over conflict of interest over Srinivasan's role as a BCCI administrator and an IPL team owner were raised. The Apex Court also questioned the decision of India Cements to invest 400 crores in the Chennai team and asked why the BCCI was not holding fresh elections. But Srinivasan wasn't the only one under the scanner. Mahendra Singh Dhoni for the first time saw his name being flashed in connection with the scam. His triple role as the Indian team skipper, captain of the Chennai Super Kings and an employee of Srinivasan's India Cements raised a red flag for the Apex Court. The court also asked if there was any reason as to why the Chennai franchise should not be scrapped. The Apex Court slammed the BCCI for delaying elections and observed that everyone who was being investigated in the IPL fixing probe should be kept away from elections. I want to cut across to my colleague Ashish Mehrishi reporting from outside the Supreme Court. We'll also be going to Rasesh Mandani stationed at the BCCI headquarters in Mumbai. Ashish, has the hearing resumed and what is expected today?
The time when the hearing was supposed to begin, but then again Preeti, we have to go back to what happened in the hearing in the IPL scam in the last hearing. Now, if you remember, three important things which came out were: one was that how Dhoni was having wearing multiple caps, how he was occupying the position of the BCCI BCCI captain, that is the Indian captain. Then he was also occupying the Chennai Super Kings captaincy, as well as he was vice president in India Cements. Now these are questions which the Supreme Court had asked Sundaram as well as Kapil Sibal, who's representing N. Srinivasan. But then N. Srinivasan's role was also being questioned. They said that N. Srinivasan's role comes into conflict of interest for the reason very clearly that he was occupying the position of the president of BCCI. Then he was the owner of IPL team Chennai Super Kings, and so they said that there is a conflict of interest very clearly for the reason, because if something is going wrong in IPL, the BCCI president is he going to shut his eyes? So there are multiple questions that the Supreme Court had asked N. Srinivasan's counsel, to which they were not able to reply in the way they should have, because the conflict of interest is very much visible there. So certainly we have to see because Harish Salve, the hearing adjourned, Harish Salve very clearly, Preeti, said that N. Srinivasan's role as well as his family members as well as Dhoni's role comes into the ambit of the rules and regulations of BCCI IPL, and there should be disciplinary as well as criminal action against them.
Has the hearing resumed? It was supposed to resume at 2 p.m. Ashish.
Yeah, I believe the court has already resumed. At 2 o'clock. It was supposed to resume. There's a colleague of mine who's already inside. So, I believe the hearing should have started by now.
All right, great. And we'll keep getting the latest updates from inside the Supreme Court. My colleague Ashish Mehrishi reporting from there. I'm also joined by Rasesh Mandani at this point of time, as well as Shishir Hattangadi, former captain Mumbai Ranji team, and Suresh Menon, a cricket writer and expert. Very quickly, I want to cut across to Rasesh for a quick word in. He's stationed outside the BCCI headquarters. Rasesh, with what transpired on Thursday, where the courts were concerned, the BCCI, of course, left with very little elbow room. We have to, of course, state at this point of time that these are observations, they are not orders. Orders will be passed depending on the evidence on hand. But come to look at it, the BCCI pretty much boxed in a corner where the Supreme Court is concerned.
Yes, Preeti, all eyes on the much-awaited order when that would come, but that would obviously be following the defense that BCCI put forth. I think that is what we are expecting today. We are expecting the BCCI lawyers to put forth, their side of the story, to put forth their defense. Kapil Sibal is also expected to carry his arguments forward. The BCCI and N. Srinivasan has received a number of reversals in the previous week through the court proceedings because of the number of harsh observations that the Supreme Court has come up with. Remember, one of the inferences that was drawn by by Justice Mudgal was about misdemeanor of the BCCI's president in exile and Srinivasan during the time when he was the secretary of the board, which dates back to a few years back to one of inaction on a player. But now with some of the observations that the Supreme Court has come up with, looking at the larger perspective, looking at N. Srinivasan's conflict of interest, the legal counsel of the BCCI and N. Srinivasan have been taken aback. They've had to handle this case at multiple fronts, and they're expected to answer to a number of queries that were raised by the Supreme Court. One of which being why should CSK not be disqualified? The other one being why should BCCI not continue with the AGM minus Srinivasan? The other one being who were the stakeholders of India Cements which made the decision to invest in a franchise? Whether Srinivasan would be in a position to take action against CSK while he happens to be the owner and the board president as well. So these are various conflicting situations that Srinivasan finds itself in, and this is of course the result of the allowance on the part of the BCCI internally. They have allowed the situation to crop up. Now it's for the BCCI to put forth its defense and try and take this case forward. But like you said, repeatedly we've been talking about that through the court proceedings in the previous week, there is little elbow room, and the legal counsel will have to come up with some master stroke to get Mr. Srinivasan out of this situation.
Well, appreciate you gentlemen for joining us. We'll of course keep coming back to the both of you, Ashish Mehrishi outside the Supreme Court and my colleague Rasesh Mandani stationed at the BCCI headquarters. I also want to go across for opinion to Mr. Shishir Hattangadi, former captain Mumbai Ranji team, and Mr. Suresh Menon, cricket writer and expert. I want to go across to Mr. Hattangadi first. Mr. Hattangadi, taking off from what my colleague Rasesh stationed outside the BCCI is concerned, at this point of time, the BCCI boxed in a corner there. Till now, it's pretty much it's been the cat with 9 lives all the time getting away. But do you reckon very little elbow room left here, especially where the announcement of the next AGM comes into play and re-election?
I think that will be the key. All roads lead to only one point now, and that is whether the Supreme Court will allow Mr. Srinivasan to contest the election, and that to me is the most important decision and recommendation that will come from the Supreme Court. Yes, today is the defense's argument, so it all depends, as your reporter said, that how Mr. Sibbal puts this across and how he is able to convince the bench that Mr. Srinivasan deserves or is justified in contesting again. But as you said, very little room for any space at this point in time for going on what has happened in the last few days on Mr. Srinivasan getting out of this one. But if he does, then it will be a masterstroke, and that's something we are keenly watching, because after all, this is what the Supreme Court is going to recommend or pass a judgment on, whether Mr. Srinivasan can contest the election.
Appreciate you joining us, Mr. Hattangadi. Quick word in from Mr. Suresh Menon, cricket writer and expert. Mr. Menon, this case has had many layers. There have been many names that have been brought out. We saw the first high-profile name of a cricketer in the form of MS Dhoni. Do we reckon more such names would be coming out in the days to follow? And more importantly, why just Chennai Super Kings? What about the concern when we come down to Rajasthan Royals?
Well, two things. First of all, I'm not quite sure that there is a valid case for conflict of interest in Dhoni's case. At the risk of putting myself in a position where there might be a contempt of court, the point is that the argument is that Dhoni is the vice president of India Cements who own CSK. But the point is that Indian cricketers have been employed by various companies over the years. The State Bank, for example, was a major employer of cricketers, and I don't know how Dhoni is being the vice president of the company affects his ability as a captain, or whether it's a clash of interest at all. That, however, is not the case with Mr. Srinivasan, and the amazing thing is that we have had 7 editions of the IPL, and all of us who've been reporting cricket, who've been writing about it, have been saying it for 7 years, or a little more than 7 years now, that there was a conflict of interest. And Mr. Srinivasan has been able to ride it out all this time. And the point is that it's not just Mr. Srinivasan. The board actually changed its rules, and when the board changed its rules to allow such a thing to happen, it was Shashank Manohar who was the president. So focusing on Srinivasan is one thing, but the point is that a whole lot of people are culpable, if not legally, certainly morally.
All right, appreciate you joining us, gentlemen. We, of course, will keep coming back to both of you as the court hearing proceeds through the course of the day.